Hello, I'm Andy Goldring. I'm calling in from the Permaculture Association office in Leeds, in the north of England. And it's a real pleasure to be joining you remotely from the UK. I wish I could be in Ukraine. Maybe one day I can come and visit you and find out more about permaculture in Ukraine and your projects. So I look forward to that at some point. Okay, so today I'm going to tell you about the land project that we started in England, and which moved to Scotland, and which now is in a few countries across Europe. So first of all, I should say what LAND stands for. So LAND is Learning and Network Demonstration. And it's a kind of acronym, which is always useful if you want to get money from a funder, to have a good acronym. So yeah, the Learning and Network Demonstration Project. Okay, so first question, how long have the networks existed? Well, informally, the permaculture networks and projects have existed since about 1983, which is roughly when permaculture started in the UK. First course was 82, 83. And some of the projects go back almost as far as 1983. The LAND network aimed to formalize some of those connections and make the existing projects accessible to the public. So the network has existed informally for a long time, but what we wanted to do was to create an opportunity for the projects that wanted to be publicly accessible to be able to connect with the public via a website and a kind of formal network. We started work on the LAND project itself in about 2006, 2007. We were part of a consortium that was raising money from the big lottery fund, and we knew that we were successful and that there was some funding coming. So we basically started to prepare with consultations with the network. What did they want? How could we work together to move permaculture forward? And in 2009, we were granted a 4-year project grant of £300,000, which was really fantastic. In Scotland, the design process began in about 2009, 2010, and we got the first funding in 2012, and we've had some additional funding since. At the moment, the LAND project in England is not funded. It's quite low level, but still functioning. But we are looking for some funds to help give it a bit of a boost. Okay, so how many projects are involved? Over the years, we've had many projects. Some come and some go. Probably we've had something like 150, 160 projects involved. At the moment, we have 81 land centres and 32 land learners. And maybe I'll come back to what the centres and learners is in a minute. Yeah, okay. And in England, we've had about 40,000 visitors. And given that asking people to send us their information about monitoring visitors and volunteers, we've probably had 60 or 70 or 80,000 visitors, but we only know about 40,000. So we reckon we get kind of half the amount of information in as is really happening. And in Scotland, we've had about 3,300 visitors, over 500 volunteers, 226 course participants, and that's for centres and learners in Scotland. Okay, so the next question we have is, how do permaculture centres work together? Well, basically, it's a membership of a peer network that shares learning and skills at regular skill sharing and training events. We work together because we know each other. And so the first step is to know each other. And obviously one of the things we like to do in permaculture is eat and to grow food. So food is a really central activity, and we try to encourage, and certainly when we had the grant funded period, we spent a lot of time having events where we ate together, we talked together, we shared our concerns and our challenges and the successes. And really the main thing was we got to know each other. And by knowing each other, we were then able to start helping each other. So there are many different examples of how permaculture centres are working together. It might be on a permablitz, or it might be to share plant material, or it might be to share skills, or it might be to run an event together. It might be that they do some training together. But all of it comes back from people knowing each other. So how do permaculture centres work together? Really by getting to know each other and sharing their hopes and their aspirations and their challenges. And through that, understanding how they can help each other. Second question, the next question was, do permaculture centres implement any joint projects and activities? And yes, they do. But mostly the ones that are geographically close to each other. So where there are clusters of projects, they tend to work with each other much more than places that are dispersed. So for example, London-based land projects have local connections across and through the London Permaculture Network. And some of the land centres have stimulated the creation of new projects that aren't necessarily land centres or land learners, but just new projects. And then those clusters help and work with each other too. So Cecil Sharp House in London has a beautiful permaculture garden. It was developed using a permablitz. There are now, 15, 16 different places that have been designed and created through the permablitz. And that network is of people helps each other on a really regular basis. So I think the key there is getting geographical clusters because it's just harder to help people that are far away. One of the things that happens as well, though, which is interesting, is there are sort of regular land volunteers and land visitors. So Helen, for example, who works in our office, is always going to visit land projects. And she's made some really good friendships, and she helps various different projects on a regular basis through volunteering. So it's not just about projects helping each other, it's also about making relationships and friendships between individuals who might travel and visit and become friends and help us over the long term. So in terms of what categories of permaculture centres we have two, land centres and land learners. When we first set up the project, what we expected was that we would have a lot of existing projects getting involved and saying we'd like to be available and accessible to the public. And that did happen. But what we didn't expect was that a huge number of new projects got in touch asking for support and wanting to be part of the land network. And we're not very good at saying no. We wanted to say yes. So we worked out how could we say yes. And the main thing we realized was that it's about managing expectations. And in my mind, I always think, if I had cycled for a whole day to get somewhere, would I be really pleased to get there, or would I be a bit disappointed? If I'm pleased to get there and there's things to see, things to touch, things to taste, things to smell, people to talk to that know what they're talking about, there's that wow factor, then fantastic, that should be a land centre. If you've cycled there for a day and it's an empty field, that's okay if that's what you're expecting. So the land centres are the places which have already demonstrated that they're good examples of permaculture. The land learners are saying, we want to become like that. But because they're learners, there's no expectations. You know that when you get there, it might just be an empty field, some people that are learning permaculture, and that you're there to help them. So by managing the expectations, it means that people aren't disappointed and they're more able to enjoy the experience of being there. And one of the big bits of advice to land centres and land learners is to really try and describe themselves well on their website and to be clear about what they can offer and what they can't offer to the people that visit their projects. by having clear expectations, it makes it much, much easier. So within land centres and land learners, there are many different categories of permaculture projects. We have examples of suburban homes and gardens. So people that are literally just in a house with a small garden, showing how they're using permaculture at that small scale. We have small holdings, essentially a small farm. We have rural farms, city farms, community gardens, forest gardens, woodlands, amazing allotments, and many other things too. When we started the project, it was through the local food fund. That's who gave us the initial grant. So initially we had to have all the projects have some sort of food growing element. Now that we haven't got funding from the local food fund, other projects can join, but it does mean that most of our projects have a strong food element in them. Okay, so what are the conditions to join the network? The criteria are listed online on our website, and it should be fairly easy to find. In brief, the land centres must have a design that uses the ethics, principles and methods of permaculture. So really, they need to be able to demonstrate that they're doing permaculture on their site. And one way to do that is to show that they have a design. Secondly, they need to be committed to their project development in the medium and long term. Essentially, there's no point adding a project in that's only going to be there for 6 months or a year or a couple of years. It takes time to develop a project, and we want to make sure that people are able to go and see something which is reasonably well established. So we need people to commit to their project development. We need to have at least one key project member with a permaculture design course certificate, ideally more. That gives us confidence that people can talk well about their project and explain it in terms of permaculture. They need to be willing to share skills and relevant information with other permaculture projects, volunteers and visitors via our website, and maintain membership with us. And they need to be willing to explain to visitors and volunteers how permaculture is put into practice on their site, either in person or through some sort of interpretive signage. It could be information that they're given. But it's really about showing people how permaculture is being used in the site. And then they need to be available to welcome and receive visitors and volunteers at least 15 times a year. We might modify that to 12, so once a month. They can set their own minimum numbers, and they can set a charge if they want to charge people for tours, but they need to be accessible at least 15 times a year at the moment. And when people come to their site, we need to make sure that they're safe. So projects need to have appropriate insurance, health and safety procedures, and risk assessments. Permaculture projects often have many different things going on, experimental plots, lots of tools, and especially for people that aren't used to that, that can be a bit of a challenging environment. So it's really important when we're engaging the public that we're able to do that in a safe way and people feel confident and comfortable where they are. And they also need to be able to display membership and a web link to the land project on their websites and on the site, just to say, yes, we are part of the land network. And finally, they need to be able to receive feedback, including a biannual check. So that means that they're open to feedback, and we can be confident that the project is still a really good example of permaculture. Okay, what are the criteria and procedures for certification? We have two processes, one in Scotland. They have their own process. Broadly speaking, it's the same in England, but there's a few changes. The main thing is to keep it as simple as possible, especially since having no funds, we've realised just how important it is to find ways to bring projects in at lower cost. If you can get funds for the network, invest them in your events, invest them in coordinators, invest them in the people and the training. Maybe start with some assessments. But I think now that we have a well-established network we are moving towards more of a peer assessment process. That hasn't come in yet, but soon we would hope that people will be able to join and be assessed by other people in the network, because it's very expensive to have staff doing it. Louise, who you can see on the video, she literally went to every project on the list initially. It took her 4 years, and we had a Permaculture Association bike, or we still have, and she cycled to all of them via public transport. So yeah, it was time consuming, and it's expensive to send a staff member. So finding ways to bring projects in using peer assessment is really key. You can look at the detail on our websites. So what are the financial conditions for the network to operate? Well, as I said, generous grants enabled the quick development of the land project in England. Now projects need to cover the fees for becoming a land centre, either through their own grant funding, crowdfunding, or using their own surplus. It's about £135 plus tutor costs, and that includes a 2.5-hour site visit, a report from the tutor, and 2 hours of admin by the association staff. We don't always have money. So basically, ultimately you need a network that's committed to making it happen. And that means either finding a good team of volunteers or a paid coordinator, or ideally a combination of volunteers and a paid coordinator. Because it does take time and effort to build relationships, to host events, and to create opportunities. Otherwise, the network degrades over time. The number of people in our network is less than it was because projects go, they don't get the communications, they forget about the network, then people move on, get a different job, they're not really a member anymore. You need to kind of keep moving and moving information, talking to people, encouraging people to connect. It's just like a garden. If you don't touch it for 2 years, it just becomes overgrown and weedy, and yeah, it's hard to see the plants that you want. So yeah, it needs the commitment of people to make the network work, and that can either be volunteers or a paid coordinator, or a combination of the two. In terms of what problems we've encountered and how we overcame them, the fundamental challenge is that mostly people are really busy. So getting them to engage in the work of the network beyond their own project is challenging. We overcame this by really trying to understand the motivations for people to be involved and finding ways to clearly add value to their work. Another challenge has been getting land centres to pay for association membership, which is partly overcome with good marketing and making it easier to renew their membership, but that's an ongoing challenge. Creating feedback mechanisms to identify successful and unsuccessful projects is not fully solved, but mostly that's through receiving emails, talking to people, getting feedback via a whole range of different kind of communication methods. Could be on Facebook. So just really knowing, giving people different options to give you information. Monitoring the numbers of volunteers and visitors for funders was really difficult, but again, was really about good communication. And I think there's other ways we need to do that in future. And then ongoing, the challenge is securing funding for additional events, training, networking activities, and ultimately, how do we create a self-financing, self-organizing network? If we can get the financial model right, then I think it would really fly ahead. So that's where I think looking at where are the entrepreneurial projects, where is the economic incentive for people to be involved, how can we pool some of that money? It's not something we've solved yet, but I think we've got some ideas, and I'd be really keen to hear your ideas and find out how you're doing it. Okay, what keeps the network together? Shared vision and commitment to permaculture. We have similar challenges, similar solutions, and it's lovely to meet other people doing a project like you. So fundamentally, it's our common interest. It's our common challenge. That's what keeps the network together. Also, it's about sharing resources. Because we're doing similar things, there will be resources that are useful for many people in the network. So creating those resources and sharing them is useful. Another aspect is about identifying and supporting key leaders and activists in the network, noticing who the vocal people are, who are the people that really talk a lot, use social media a lot, are, you know, the amplifiers. Who are they? Talk to them and give them the information that helps, that means that they can help you to spread the word and get people involved. Okay, then finally,